Choosing the best measure to describe data. All right, so we've been working on mean, median, and mode now for at least a week, if not a little long. So what this topic is going to teach us to do is what is the best time to choose mean, median, or mode. That's the idea of this topic here. So we have these three scenarios. We have the readers of children's magazines are asked to name their favorite animals. Which measure indicates the animal chosen most often? In Professor Johnson's class, the 9 students had the following scores. Which measure should be used to summarize the data? In the past 9 days, Karen has received the following numbers of email advertisements per day. Which measure should be used to summarize the data? So we have to know when is the best time to choose these. So let's go down here to look at the explanation. And we are going to write some notes. If you're not writing down notes, it's very helpful. It's very hard to remember some of these details onto the next page. So when a data set is made up of numbers, the mean or median is usually used to summarize the data. So if we don't have numbers, so no numbers, because they didn't mention, they said mean and median if there's no number, or if there are numbers, if it's made up of numbers. If there are no numbers, then mode would probably be the only way to compare the information, because there's no numbers to compute mean and median. We need to actually be able to calculate those two things. Mode, we're just looking at how many times does something happen. So that one we can calculate without numbers on there. And then they also go down here to tell us that when the data set has outliers, the median is a better measure. So outliers, we want to use median. And no outliers, which is the next sentence here, and I'm gonna get into what an outlier is. No outliers mean that we should use mean. So what is an outlier? And if you don't know, you can always click on this. And we really haven't talked about outliers at all. So an outlier is a number in a data set that stands out from the other numbers. So here they give us this example one. We have 3, 14, 14, 15, 7. Well, 3 would be considered an outlier because it's so much smaller than the other numbers. And then if we look at the second example, we have a lot of small numbers, and then all of a sudden it jumps to 2 large numbers. So these would be considered the outliers. Makes a difference when you're actually going through and calculating different pieces when you have outliers, because it can kind of throw off the information when you have an outlier. And again, an outlier just means something that's much smaller than the other numbers or much bigger than the other numbers. So if we go back and we look at the questions again, this first one didn't give us any numbers. So all we're going to do is to figure out the most often chosen, well, that would be mode. And then in Professor Johnson's, which one would be the best one to use? Well, if we look at this, these are pretty evenly distributed. There isn't one that's jumping way down low or one that's jumping way up high. I mean that there's no outliers. So I would go with mean on this one. And then in the past 9 days for Karen receiving her emails, well, it's going pretty consistently up here, and this doesn't terribly high, but it does jump very low for 16. So that means that 16 is an outlier. So I would go with median. Literally all we're going to do, if I scroll down here, it shows you the same thing. They went mean, median. So we're just going to take into account these 3 things here and look at the questions. Which one would be best to measure these things with? And the reason we don't want an outlier when we're dealing with mean is the average, meaning we added them all up and we divided by however many numbers there were. And if we're doing that and one is very, very low or one is very, very high, it's going to throw off my average. My average should be in the middle. But if I have a number that's very small or very large compared to the other ones, my middle gets moved and it's not a true middle anymore, just because of the movement there. It scoots it around. So actually, when we're calculating mean, we do kind of want to ignore outliers if we have them, because it throws things off. We kind of consider that to be irrelevant information, meaning that it's not important, or that maybe it was mistakenly recorded, something like that. And median with outliers is okay because it just shows us where is the actual middle when you put the numbers in order, what's the middle of the numbers. So that's still generally an okay measure, even with outliers. All right, so let's go ahead and get through this. So Donna wants to determine which letter appears the most often in her favorite poem. There's no numbers, so I would go with mode. And it also says most often. That's what it means, is how often does something happen. A car dealer has used cars for sale for the following amounts, and we need to choose mean, median, or mode for the best way to summarize the data. So we have pretty consistent amounts here, but then 7,700, that jumps up pretty far all of a sudden. It goes from 4,000, 5,700. This one down the bottom, that doesn't jump down very far, so that's okay. But this is considered an outlier. So since I have an outlier, I'm going to go with median. The 9 members of the dance team each bought new shoes here, the prices they paid. So we're pretty consistent here, nothing too terribly small, nothing too terribly large. So I'm going to go with mean on this one. Check. All right, let's go to the next one. The following number of people attended the last 9 screenings of. So this, let's see, that does jump down pretty far. It goes from almost 100, almost down to 100 in this one. And this one doesn't jump very far. It only jumps a couple when we go up. So this is an outlier. It's still a larger number. We're not looking for like really small numbers. We're just looking to jump. Instead of jumping a couple like all the others do, this is jumping almost 100. So we with one that does have outliers, so median. At a certain company, the 10 employees have the following weekly salaries. So it looks like we're going pretty consistently all the way up. No huge jumps, 10 to 20 bucks each time. So that would be no outliers. I would go with mean. On a test, each student is given a grade of A, B, C, D, or F, which measure tells the grade given most often. So every time you hear most often or anytime there's no numbers, mode. All right, let's do one more of these. A data set shows the average age of each resident at Lakeview Retirement Home, which measure gives the age shared by most residents. So I'm hearing most, and I don't see any numbers. So in a survey, 9 people reported how many soft drinks they drank, geez Louise, in the last month. Here are their responses. So we have a consistent amounts going up 1 or 2, maybe. Yeah, it looks like just 1 or 2 at a time. And then all of a sudden, poof, that jumps up a lot. So that means we have an outlier here. We want to go with median. The last 9 calls to the customer support line had the following lengths in minutes. So this looks pretty darn consistent. We're going up 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. So every single one of them go up 1 minute. That's very consistent. That means there are no outliers because there's no big jumps. So no outliers means we are going to use mean. All right, we finished another one. Yay.